There's like three things involved with no money down or with real estate in general. You have skill, you have money, and you have what I call the hustle or the actions, the work, right? You can know how to do something, you can do the work, and you can have the money. Those are the three things needed. This is the Better Life Podcast, where we talk about real estate investing, building wealth, and all in all living a better life. My name is Brandon Turner, and I've spent my life investing in real estate to achieve financial freedom. And alongside my co-host, Mr. Cam Cathcart, we want to help you do the same. On the show, you're going to hear from world-class guests who have been handpicked to help you level up your investing, your leadership, your goals, your habits, and more to become the very best version of yourself. So join us as we explore the habits, the actions, the beliefs that it takes to build wealth through real estate investing without losing your soul. This episode is brought to you by our friends at TurboTenant and Ballpoint Marketing. These two companies are big supporters of the show, and they know how to work with real estate investors and help real estate investors grow their businesses. So be sure to stay tuned to hear how you can get discounts and free stuff from them both. And as you probably know, all the profits from this show go to charities of the guest choosing. So when you listen to the sponsors on the show and you work with these hand-chosen by me sponsors, you're actually doing good for the world. Now let's get to the show. Brandon Turner. I've invested in real estate now for like 15 years now. I even wrote a book called The Book on Investing in Real Estate with No and Low Money Down, and a bunch of other books. I actively invest in real estate today, and I want to lay out for you my top 10 favorite no and low money down strategies. That sound good? I want you to do me a favor, grab a piece of paper, take some notes, and let me know if you have questions in the comment section below. But first, a little bit of understanding about no and low money down real estate investing. If you want to invest in real estate, you can do it without money. So first, understanding that the money comes from somewhere. That's what I'm gonna be explaining, where that money can come from. If you want to engage in no and low money down, you do need to have skill. Really, there's like three things involved with no money down or with real estate in general. You have skill, you have money, and you have what I call the hustle or the actions, the work, right? You can know how to do something, you can do the work, and you can have the money. Those are the three things needed. If you want to do without the money, then you need to have the skill and the action, those two things. So the fact that you're watching this video right now tells me that you're willing to learn. Keep learning, keep growing. That's going to help you a ton. So build a skill set until you're incredibly smart when it comes to real estate investing, specifically your niche of real estate. Like, what exactly are you going to focus on? The better you get at that, the easier it will be to do no and low money down strategies. The list I'm going to give you is my top 10 list. Here's how I want you to think about this. Creative finance, which is what we call no and low money down strategies, is really like a bunch of tools inside of a toolbox. I mean, think about this. If you had a toolbox and you only had one tool, you had a hammer, there's very few projects you could take on around your house. You could maybe pound a nail on the wall, you could pull a nail out, you could hit a robber over the head when he comes into your house. That's about it. If you had a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver, well, now you could build a swing set for your kids. Now, if you had a jackhammer in there and you had a tape measure, now you can build a house. The more tools in your toolbox, the more projects you can take on. The same is true for real estate. Your mental toolbox, what's up here? The more of these 10 that I'm going to give you in a second that you understand how they work and how to use them, the better you'll be able to fit the right strategy for the right property, the right situation. All of these could work in different situations. You need to learn them all so you know where to fit them in. Now, you can get really good at one of them and focus that way. Having a basic understanding of all of them is going to be super helpful. Here we go. My top 10 no and low money down strategies. I'm going to start with number 10 because it's not technically real estate investing, but it can be done with no and low money down. And that is this idea of wholesaling. You've heard of wholesaling before, most likely, but if not, here's the gist. I am a wholesaler, let's say. I go out and find properties that are usually like nasty or there's something wrong with them. There's a person getting into divorce and they just need to sell quickly. Whatever the problem is, I'm going to go as a wholesaler and find that property, and I'm going to talk with the seller. For now, just understand you got to find those properties, and then you're going to negotiate and you're going to put the property under contract. When I say that, I mean you're going to sign an agreement that says, I, the wholesaler, and then this is the key, and or someone I assign it to, or and or assigns, that's the legal phrase there, will buy your property for whatever, $500,000. Because now you have a contract. You have a legal contract signed by both people that says you or someone that you pick will buy that property for $500,000. Now you go and find usually a house flipper or a landlord, and you say, hey, I found this really great deal.
it's worth like $600,000, but I can give it to you for $520. And they're like, $520 is a great deal. So now they buy it for $520. What are you going to buy it for? $500. Except for the reason I say it's not technically real estate investing, because a wholesaler generally doesn't actually own the property. They simply sell the contract. They assign the contract and they make a $20,000 fee for doing that. They're basically buying for $500, selling for $520. They make $20,000. It didn't take any money other than maybe some marketing costs if you were like sending out letters. That is a legit way to make money from nothing by putting together a buyer and a seller. Now, disclaimer, wholesaling is considered illegal in some areas, like some states. Ohio is one of them. In areas of Ohio and Florida, in some areas, they've said, hey, you cannot wholesale. That is illegal. So make sure you understand the laws, understand how to do wholesaling. Even in those states, there's ways to do it and there's ways not to do it. The legal issue there is, are you practicing real estate without a real estate license? And if you are practicing real estate without a real estate license in an area that doesn't like that, which most areas don't like that, you've got a problem. So how do you do it legally? Well, that's the question. You can get your real estate license. There's ways to do it that way. Or you can do what's called a double closing, which is where you actually buy the property and then the same day sell it. And there are actually transactional funding companies that will fund it, the $500,000 for like an hour, and then you sell for $520. Now you're going to pay a few $1,000s for that. Okay, fine. You made $15,000 instead of $20. Now, why do I call that real estate investing if you're not buying rentals? Well, because you just made $20,000 through real estate, through the investment of your time and effort. And now that $20,000 can be used and dumped into either more marketing for more deals, or you can dump it into buying your own investment properties. So a lot of investors actually got started by wholesaling. They learn how to find deals and how to negotiate and how to analyze and how to do all the hard stuff by being a wholesaler. And then they move into the actual world of flipping or rental property. So that is number 10. Moving to number 9 is called a lease option. A lease option is where, again, it's not even technically investing because you don't own the property, but let me explain. A lease option, or maybe a term you've heard, rent to own, is where you rent somebody's property and then re-rent it out to a tenant. If you do a rent to own with the tenant, that's called a lease option sandwich. Now, what's the beauty of this? Well, let me explain. Let's say you go out there and you find a property that you want to buy, that you would love to get some cash flow from a tenant, but you don't have any money. But you find a duplex. And that duplex, the owner, they want, let's call it $200,000. You don't have any money to buy that property for $200,000. So instead, you agree to rent to own, or a lease option. You sign a lease on the duplex, the whole thing, for let's call it $1,000 a month. And then you have an option, which is a legal document. It's two separate documents, lease, option. You have an option to buy the property at $200,000 anytime in the next, call it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 2 years, whatever you define. I have a lease that I'm now paying $1,000 a month, and I have an option to buy it later if I'm able to. So the beauty of this now is you have basically no money, and now, yes, you have to pay $1,000 a month, but you're going to rent that property out for, let's call it $2,000 a month. So you're bringing in $2,000 and you're paying out $1,000 plus some other expenses. You're not going to purely profit all of that, but that is a way to get real cash flow for almost no money out of pocket whatsoever. It's a really neat strategy. And then let's say down the road you got some money. Well, now you have a legal option, which is you have a right to buy the property. They have to sell it to you if you have an option. You don't have to buy it though. It's an option, but they have the requirement to sell it to you at that point. So you can lock in that price at $200. Even 4 years later, if you still have that option going and the property's worth $300, you can still buy it for $200. That's why options are super interesting. So lease options, very neat. Next one, number 8, home equity lines of credit. Over the past few years, real estate has gone through the roof. You know that, right? Like you buy a property for $200,000 5 years ago, it's probably worth $300,000 today. The difference between what you owe on a property and what that property is worth, so if you owe $200, it is worth $300. That difference is called equity. That's your wealth. That's your net worth. That's equity. Well, there are loan programs offered by almost every bank and credit union called home equity lines of credit. And you can do it on your primary residence. There's also ways to do it on rental property. So if you have equity in your property, you can then borrow money against that equity. In other words, they would put a lien, like a second mortgage, on the property that says if you don't pay it back, they can take your property. But now you can borrow that $100,000 $100,000 or a good portion of it to do whatever you want with it, to go buy real estate. In fact, I bought a triplex one time and I didn't have the money for it. Found some partners that wanted to invest with me. They didn't have the money either, but what they had was a line of credit. A line of credit allowed them then to borrow the $30,000 or $40,000 we needed, and then we bought the property. HELOCs can be a super good way if you have equity, if you have property already, you can tap into it, use that, and then buy real estate with that. The reason it's not, at number 1, 2, 3 on my list today is because interest rates are really high right now. So you might, for a HELOC, where 2 years ago, you might have been paying 1 or 2, 3% for a HELOC. Today, you might be paying 7, 8, 10% for a HELOC. So it can still work, especially on a short-term basis. Who cares if you're going to buy a property, fix it up, and then sell it again? Who cares if you're paying 8% on a HELOC? It's only for a short time. Or if you're going to refinance it, who cares if it's a short time? I wouldn't want an 8% loan for the next 30 years, but as long as it's a short-term option, it can be great, what we call gap funding. All right, that was number 8. Number 7, hard money. Hard money is a lender who lends on the hard asset, not on your personal income or credit score necessarily. Now, they might still look at your income and credit score, but they are lending on the hard asset. Hard money is not hard money because it's hard to get. It's because it's on a hard asset. So there are literally thousands of companies out there that are hard money lenders. And what they do is they will look at the property and they will lend you a certain amount based on how valuable that property is and then how much you're asking for. Typically in the, call it 50 to 60% range. So if you find a property that could be worth $100,000, I'm going to use simple math here, $100,000, but the owner of the property is willing to take $50,000 for it because it needs a lot of work, the hard money lender might give you 50 or even 60 or even 70 potentially, maybe even 80 or 90 depending. So the better deal you can get, the more likely you can get a no money down. Now, no money is difficult with hard money loans. I'll admit that fully, but it is possible. It's also more possible the better deal you have and the more experience you have. All right, that was hard money number 7. Well, how do you find hard money lenders? Go to biggerpockets.com/hard money lenders. You can also go to a local real estate club, talk to other house flippers, talk to wholesalers. They're not hard to find. You could Google them. You can find them. They're all over the place. Get to know some hard money lenders in your area. Find out what they require from you, and then build a relationship and get some hard money. Number 6, it's a more popular strategy lately. It's called sub 2 or subject to. Subject to has been around forever, but just lately it's been working better. And there's been some influencers like Morby who have been talking a lot about this. Subject to is where you find a property that, let's say you want to buy 123 Main Street, and the owner, his name is John, and John owes $200,000 on the property. And maybe the property is worth only $200,000. Well, you can buy John's property subject to the existing loan. What that means is you're going to buy the property, but you're going to keep the loan in place. You're not going to pay off the loan. So the title transfers to you, but the property, the lien is still on the property. The lien is still on the former owner, even though you're the new owner. Now, you might be wondering, wait a second, you can't buy a property without paying off the lender? You can. Now, the question is, what's the bank going to do about it? And this is why I like sub 2, but you have to be careful with sub 2. If you buy a property and don't pay the loan off, there is something called a due on sale clause. A due on sale clause is part of the original mortgage, and it says, hey, if you sell the property, we have the right to call the loan due. It doesn't mean they're going to. And in reality, they generally have not. 99% of the time in the past, the banks have not called the loan due. There's ways to hide it or at least not let the bank know. This is why sub 2 has never been one of my favorite ways to do it, because I don't like that risk. What I've learned from guys like Morby is that there are ways to drastically reduce the risk. And the thing is, it's not necessarily an ethical consideration, it's a contractual situation. So how do you make sure the contract is still fulfilled and that they're not going to call the note due? And you're not doing anything illegal, you're not doing anything wrong necessarily, you just want to make sure you're reducing your risk. So sub 2 can be a super unique way to buy real estate today using very little, if no money of your own. You just got to have a plan at some point of what to do if the bank does want their money back. Can you refinance? Can you do something? So sub 2, super interesting. Before you go into a sub 2 deal though, please go and read a book on it. Pace just wrote one, Wealth Without Cash it's called. You can find it on Amazon. Learn how to do it right and then go do it.
Hey, if you're an active real estate investor, like you own properties, chances are you got into real estate to get financial freedom. But look, almost every active investor I talk to, they lack a plan on exactly how they're going to get to that financial freedom, right? They consume education, maybe podcasts, and then they don't take action. They blame it on not having money or maybe high interest rates or there's no deals, but they don't ever get closer to that financial freedom. It just seems like this elusive number keeps going farther and farther away. Now, if that sounds like you're not alone. That's exactly why I started the Better Life Tribe. It gives active real estate investors an operating system to help them reverse engineer their way to financial freedom. And they get a dedicated one-on-one results coach to ensure they take actions on the right things to drive growth in their portfolios. Now listen, this isn't some real estate coach who's going to teach you how to buy a duplex and hold your hand. Like, you know how to do that. And if you need more education, we got over 100 hours of content plus a community to help you. But you get a dedicated coach that's going to help you get clarity on where you're going, help you create an actionable plan to get there, and then most importantly, hold you accountable on a weekly basis to actually taking action on the right things so you can track your journey to financial freedom. You know, as I always say, success is not a surprise. It's a system. And the Better Life Tribe is going to help you create that system in your life to ensure success. Now, if you're interested in learning more, just go to abetterlife.com/coach. Again, abetterlife.com/coach.
Number 5, private money. So private money is when somebody, an individual, will fund your real estate deal and they just want a fixed return. For example, you could go to your mailman who happens to have a few $100,000 in his savings account and you're like, hey, can you just lend me that money at 8% and I'm going to go buy these rental properties? And he's like, well, I'm only earning 0% in the bank right now. Sure, I guess I'll lend that to you. Now, private money is amazing. In fact, it would be like number one if it were easy to get. It's not always easy to get private money because not a lot of people just have money sitting around that they just want to go get a fixed return on. Especially in 2023, when they can get 5% on their money in a checking account, they're going to be less likely to want to get 8 or 9% from you, a more risky play, when a checking account is going to be guaranteed 5%. And so private money still does exist. It still is doable. In fact, I was just talking to a friend yesterday who's getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in private money from several different lenders. It still works. It's just harder to find. But if you can find it, if you can build relationships with people who have money, especially former real estate investors are oftentimes good ones to talk to about private money because they may be at a phase of their career where they still like real estate, they understand real estate, but they don't necessarily want to be involved in the day-to-day. They might be willing to just lend you the money and have a fixed return for their retirement. Number 4, seller financing. Now, if you roughly, and this might not be true anymore, but like, I don't know, when I wrote the book, No One Low Money Down, the book on investing in real estate with No One Low Money Down, I did some research and found out that like 30% of all houses in America were owned free and clear. In other words, there was no mortgage on them. And I'm sure that's probably a lower number today, but there are still plenty of houses out there today and properties that do not have loans. Maybe they're a Dave Ramsey fan, so they just never got a loan on it. Maybe they paid it off. They're an older landlord that paid it off over 30 years. Maybe there's some other reason, but they have no mortgage on it. In that case, you can buy the property using what's called seller financing, which is the seller of the property. They transfer title to you. You now own the property legally, but you actually now have a loan with the seller. The seller is essentially saying, yes, you owe me $200,000, but I will take that over 30 years or 15 years, whatever you decide. It's kind of like if you were to sell your truck. Let's say you wanted to sell your pickup truck to your brother-in-law, but your brother-in-law don't have no money, and you want $10,000 for your pickup truck. So you say, hey, brother-in-law, how about instead, I'll sell the truck to you, and you're just going to make payments to me of $300 a month for the next 3 years. And they're like, great. And you're like, great. And it's their truck now. They own the truck, but you put a lien on the truck. If they didn't pay, you could take the truck back. That's exactly what seller financing is. You put a lien on the property, they put a lien on your house that says if you don't pay them back, they're going to take the house back for themselves. I love seller financing. Now, again, not super easy to find, but if you were out there looking, you can deliberately look for people who have no mortgages. That's public data. And you went to them and said, hey, you want to sell your property. What's it worth? $200,000. You owe nothing on it. Okay. If you sold that today, that $200,000, you got to pay taxes, including what's called recapture of depreciation. There's a lot of taxes to pay. If you were to sell that property for $200, you're probably going to walk with like $140. Then what are you going to do with that money? And they're like, oh, I guess I'm going to put it in the stock market. Oh, you want to put it in the stock market in this crazy market right now? What are you going to get in there? 2%, maybe 3, 4, 5. I don't know. What are you going to get? It's risky. People get, especially real estate investors who have owned property for a long time, they're not usually stock people. What are they going to do with that money? They're going to live on it, and then it's going to be gone someday. So this is a great opportunity for that person to turn their money into a seller financing. You can pay them for the next 30 years. So imagine they're a 60-year-old investor, has their property paid off. You can now put a 30-year mortgage on it. You own the property. You pay the same amount for 30 years. the owner gets the same amount for the next 30 years. Amazing way for them to go into retirement with an asset they understand because they once owned it. Seller financing is incredible, and it still works, and it's a phenomenal way to invest in real estate. But you know what I like a lot, and one that I do more than anything else on this list is number 3. The reason I didn't put it as number 1 is because most of you are not going to do this strategy. Number 3 is real estate syndication. Real estate syndication is where you raise money from a bunch of investors. They all pool their money together, and then you go buy big properties together. So you could go to 4 buddies, have each of them put in $100,000, and then you don't put in anything, and you then split the profits. Typically, like what we do is like what's called a 70-30 split. So I get 30%. My investors who put in the money get 70%. Now, sometimes it's 80-20. Sometimes I've heard 90-10. It depends on how good of a deal you got and what you can negotiate for. Now, the beauty of this, of course, is that you get between 20 and 30% of all the upside and the cash flow. Now, we do put something in there called preferred return. So my 30% doesn't even start until my investors get 7 or 8%. It depends on the deal, 6, 7, or 8%. Guaranteed is the wrong word, but they are guaranteed to get their 7% before I get anything. And they're not guaranteed to get 7%, but they're guaranteed to get it before I get anything, or at least in terms of like, I might make nothing if I don't do a good job. So it's a really cool win-win way to really scale rapidly. I mean, to be good at syndication, you have to be really, really good at building a team because it takes a number of people to be able to run a large commercial operation like this. You have to be really good at raising capital. You have to understand real estate. I would not start with syndication ever. I think it's too complex to start. But if you are somebody who's been investing for a while, you can start small. In fact, my very first syndication was only 2 money partners. It was me and 2 other people. They put in their money, but I ran it like I was running $1 million or $1 billion syndication because I wanted to make sure I was learning along the way. And that deal ended up being really good. We ended up getting a phenomenal return for our investors. Then we did another deal and another and another. And that's how I got up to where I'm at today. So syndication, very powerful. If you want to learn more about that, I wrote a book alongside my partner in Open Door Capital. His name is Brian Murray. We wrote actually 2 books together called The Multifamily Millionaire, Volume 1 and 2. You can get those in Amazon. Volume 2 is a little more on the syndication side. Volume 1 is a little more on the smaller side. So 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 unit properties. But I would recommend reading both if you want to get into syndication. Read Volume 1, then Volume 2. All right, moving on to number 2, equity partnerships. An equity partnership is simply you partner with someone else, they bring the money, the equity needed to buy the deal, you bring the deal or the work, or both. And we talked about this earlier in the video, right? Where there's 3 things you need. You need money, you need hustle, and you need education. And education gets you the deal, right? You know how to do it. I've done this partnership thing over and over and over and over in my career. I'll give you an example. One of my very first properties I wanted to buy, I mentioned it earlier, that triplex, I didn't have the money for it. So I went to some friends of mine and I said, hey, would you be interested in partnering on this deal? You bring the money, I'll bring the deal, and I'll manage it. I'll take care of all the problems, the rehab, I'll manage the tenants, I'll do everything. And then we'll split everything 50-50. And they were like, okay. And then again, like I said earlier, they used the home equity line of credit, so they didn't even have any money into it. They borrowed the money for the down payment. They ended up making ridiculous money on that deal over time, and they never had to do any work. I ended up making ridiculous money on that deal, and I didn't have to put a dime into that property. I just put sweat equity into it. You know, it's funny when I tell people this story, or anytime I talk about equity partnerships, and I say like I split it 50-50, I get one of 2 responses. Some people are like, why would you give them 50%? They didn't do any work. You found the deal, you managed it, all they did was brought some money. Why would you give them 50%? And other people go, why would they give you 50%? You didn't put any money in. They put all the money. They could have gone and done it on their own. Isn't that funny that people have those 2 reactions? And that shows me that that partnership is a good partnership. You know, like both of us won. They didn't want to do the work. They didn't have the ability, the knowledge, the time, the execution, the habits. They didn't have that ability to do that work, but they still wanted to invest. But what they did have was the ability to bring the money. On the other side, I didn't have the money. I couldn't do it without bringing in other money. And so of course I'm going to give away 50% because I didn't have the money. And so it worked out really, really well. And does it have to be 50-50? No, you can do any variation of that, but 50-50 is a nice, easy place to start when it comes to partnerships. So how do you find a good equity partner? Well, go to real estate clubs, interact online, join a tribe. You know, we've got a tribe called the Better Life Tribe. If you go to abetterlife.com, it's a tribe of over 1,000 members who are all generally real estate fanatics. We all love real real estate, and you engage in the conversation and you chat with people and you start learning what they want, what do they have, what do you have, and how you can work together. It's just almost all your problems can be solved by just meeting more people. So meet more people, figure out what you have, figure out what you need, and then build relationships until you have that. Equity partnerships are one of my all-time favorite ways to invest in real estate. I recommend it all the time over almost everything else on this list. However, there is one on this list that I like even better, specifically for new investors. You ready for it? Now, before I give you number one, I just say one more time, if you did not hit that little plus sign, the thumbs up button on this video, please do so. That helps me out a lot, helps me reach more people. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. All right, number one favorite strategy. It was also my favorite in 2022, 2021, 2020, and back for quite a while. And that is the idea of house hacking. If you haven't heard that term before, let me explain it. House hacking is a term that I coined a decade ago that basically means you buy a house or a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex. It's important to understand it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 units. I'll explain why that's important in a minute. And then you live in one of the units, or if it's a house, you live in one of the bedrooms, and you rent the other ones out. And so you can actually live potentially for free because you rent it out. In fact, I've been house hacking since I was 21. My very first rental property, I bought a house, but then I bought a duplex after that I used as a rental. I lived in one of the units. I rented the other unit out. I still remember the day, the first day I moved my tenant in, and they came and brought me $650 in cash. Now, don't take money in cash. I don't do that anymore. They gave me $50 in cash. And I remember holding that money in that alleyway going, wait, my mortgage is only $620 a month. I'm living for free right now. Woohoo! Like, that was super exciting to me. And it led me on a journey where I've house hacked over and over and over and over. In fact, right now I live in a multi-million-dollar house, probably $3 to $4 million value. I'm still house hacking. It's actually a 3-unit property. And in fact, one of the units I rent out to a buddy, which is generally not a good idea to rent to friends or family, but I'm doing it and I love it. It's working really well for me. But I rent to a friend and business partner. And then the downstairs unit, I could rent out anytime I wanted to, whether it's a vacation rental or I could rent it out long term. But actually, I keep it empty right now because I like family and friends to come stay with me. I live in Hawaii, so I like them to come hang out sometimes. But the fact is, I'm house hacking in a multi-million-dollar house. So it works at all levels. A $100,000 duplex, a $4 million house, it works. And why is it a no and low money down strategy? Because there are loan programs that if you're willing to live in the property for a short period of time, you can get very low down loans. I'll give you 3 examples. Number 1, the most common, an FHA loan. An FHA loan is sponsored by the US government, and it only requires you to bring 3.5% down. And that 3.5% can be gifted to you from somebody. You don't even have to have your own money necessarily for that. Somebody could gift you the 3.5%, and you could buy a property for the 3.5% down. That means you could buy a $200,000 property for $7,000. You can save up $7,000 and buy that property. You can even make the seller of the property then pay your closing costs. There's also loans called a VA loan, which is if you're a military veteran of the U.S. military or married to one, you can get a 0% down loan from the government, and that works again for single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex. And the third thing would be a USDA loan. That is a loan that, again, sponsored by the government, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Same ones that inspect your meat and tell you it's good meat or not. They actually have a loan program for rural properties. So you can get 0 down with a USDA loan as well. And there's probably other loan programs out there for low down. There's 5% conventional loans that you can go get as well. But the bottom line is if you're willing to live in the property for at least a year, that's generally the requirement they want you to stay for, you can get very, very low down payment. Now, when you're ready to move out, you can move right out, not a problem. And you can keep the loan there for as long as you want. Now, you can only have one FHA loan at a time, so understand you can't just go get FHA over and over and over, but it does work.
And that, my friends, is the show. Thank you for tuning in. And hey, before you go, if you enjoyed this episode or if you just enjoy the show in general, please consider leaving us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. We really do value your feedback, and we read the comments. We make future decisions about topics and guests and everything else. Plus, it helps us reach more people, and the more reviews we get, the more people hear it and watch the show and share it, and it's awesome. Last but not least, please head over to social media. Consider befriending me, following me, subscribing to all that stuff at Better Life and my personal page at Beardy Brandon, especially over on Instagram, YouTube, and really everywhere else. So thank you again for listening. I'm honored that you would bring me along on your journey toward building wealth through real estate investing without losing your soul. Now, this show is about living a better life, but if you want my opinion on what it takes to live the best life ever, just go to abetterlife.com/best life to hear some of my views on life and spirituality. I think you'll like it. abetterlife.com/bestlife. With that said, thanks for listening to the show. We'll see you next week.